In 1518, a woman in Strasbourg began dancing in the street, and she did not stop. Within weeks, hundreds had joined her, many collapsing from exhaustion, some even dying. There was no campaign, no doctrine, no organized cause. Something became active, and others entered it. That's more disturbing than the event itself. It means human beings can move into a shared pattern without anything that feels like a conscious decision. And if that's possible, then identity may not be the private possession people think it is. What feels personal may often be a state already in motion, just waiting for someone to step into it and call it self.
And that changes where the real tension sits. The strange thing is not that people danced. The strange thing is that no one needed persuasion. They didn't gather around an argument. They aligned with an atmosphere. Participation began before explanation arrived. And once you see that, conscious reality creation stops being about positive thinking. The deeper question becomes, what inner conditions are you repeatedly entering before you even name them? Because a state can become available first and thought arrives later just to make it feel reasonable. How much of your daily life is being built around those silent entries?
Most people assume that behavior comes after identity. First, there's a self. Then that self chooses, reacts, speaks, and then acts. But Strasbourg points the other way. Behavior may reveal the state rather than express a stable person behind it. In that case, the self is not the source. It's the label attached after the state is already running. That breaks a flattering illusion. You may not be living as one continuous you who occasionally changes mood. You may be moving through states, and each state brings its own version of you with it, its own tone, its own reactions, its own sense of what is normal.
That is why yesterday matters more than people realize. You call yesterday's version of yourself the same person you are now. But that sameness is largely memory doing repair work. The emotional climate shifted. The assumptions shifted. Even your sense of what was possible may have changed between morning and evening. Memory stitches those differences together and hands you a story called continuity. But the trouble is that continuity gets mistaken for identity. You begin defending a moving pattern as if it was an essential self. What should be observed becomes protected, and what should be interrupted starts to feel like the truth.
Go back to Strasbourg and notice the deeper movement. What started with one body did not remain with one body. It became a condition that others could occupy. Once the pattern was active, it no longer needed to be originated. It only needed to be entered. The event stopped behaving like an isolated act and started behaving like an available field. That is why it unsettles people centuries later. It suggests that human experience is not always manufactured from scratch. Sometimes it's inherited through contact, resonance, and repetition. What spreads is not always an idea. Sometimes what spreads is a state waiting for a host.
Now bring that into ordinary life, where it is easier to miss. A person says they always react a certain way, always shrink at the same moment, always expect the same disappointment. They call that honesty. Often it is just familiarity. They're not freshly deciding in each moment. They are re-entering a known state, and the known state supplies the response. That response feels natural because the path is worn. But natural is not the same as inevitable. It's only the feeling of repetition that after enough returns. And recognition becomes consent before deliberate thought can intervene.
So the principle hiding in all of this is this. Identity is a field that you step into, not a fixed self that you permanently own. That sounds abstract until you notice how different versions of you become available under different states. One version speaks with certainty, another contracts. Another sees possibility everywhere. Another cannot imagine a good outcome at all. Which one is the real you? The better question is, which one is currently active and being continued? Once identity is understood as occupancy rather than essence, conscious creation becomes more precise. You stop trying to improve a solid self and start noticing which field that you're standing in, feeding, and mistaking for your nature.
This also exposes the most common error in self-development work. People try to improve the state they're currently in. They refine it, analyze it, decorate it with better language, and call that transformation. But that leaves the structure intact. The room is repainted, but not exited. So effort becomes circular. The person keeps working on the same identity without noticing that the work itself keeps them tethered to it. Modification is not departure. Better wording is not a new field. What looks like progress can be continuity, wearing a more sophisticated face.
A real completion state looks quieter than people expect. In Strasbourg, there came a point where the moment no longer belonged to the first dancer in any meaningful sense. It had become self-carrying. In personal life, completion begins when that participation ends, not when the state is defeated or hilled into submission. It ends when it's no longer re-entered. And that is why completion often feels almost inevitable at first. There is simply an absence of return. The old state does not get fed, and without that feeding, its apparent power begins to fade. What once seemed like identity starts looking like repetition.
From there, the practical orientation changes completely. You stop asking, how do I fix this version of me? That question already assumes the version should remain central. The better question is, what am I continuing by returning to this state? That shifts attention from repair to selection and removes an enormous amount of unnecessary strain. You're not required to wrestle every pattern into submission. You are required to notice where you keep stepping. The point is not self-rejection, the point is self-accuracy. Once you see that your reality is shaped by the state being continued, you stop treating every internal movement as sacred truth.
Effort and control need reframing here. People imagine change means holding a better state in place through force, discipline, and a constant correction. But what is deeply stabilized does not need to be held. It remains because it's become normal. Real change has a cleaner feel. It comes through non-return, through allowing a different condition to remain without dragging the old one back for comparison.
The Strasbourg event leaves behind one hard lesson. A state can move through people so completely that they mistake participation for identity. The same things happen in ordinary life every day. Your reality is not being lived by one permanent self traveling through time unchanged. It's being lived by that version of you that remains active through repetition. There is relief in seeing that not everything has to be healed by force. Some patterns weaken because they are no longer inhabited. Some identities fade because they are no longer resumed. You do not need to repair every former self. You need to stop continuing what no longer deserves continuity. What is not re-entered does not remain you. It becomes history.
If this has shifted something in how you see yourself, not as fixed, but as something quietly being continued, then stay with that. Let it settle rather than rushing past it. And if you value conversations that move at this level, you already know what to do. Subscribe, share this with someone who's ready to hear it, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Until next time, think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.
I'm a quiet rebel, I don't need a shower. Changing the world from the inside out. No fists in the air.